Hello, everyone. This is just a quick pre-welcome to the session. We are going to wait another 2 or 3 minutes before we begin, but thank you so much for being here. I promise it's going to be an exciting discussion. Welcome, Your Excellencies, dear delegates, dear speakers, and dear guests to this session. Thank you for joining it. I think it's a very important topic that we will be debating now, how to finance climate adaptation in the transport sector, and what strategies actually work. That is what we want to be discussing over the next 1.5 hours, also hopefully involving you in this discussion. We want to talk about which actions transport stakeholders need to take and which investments are needed in which areas of the transport sector in order to prepare for the extreme weather events associated with climate change. We're all seeing them around the world. Heat waves, floods, storms, forest fires are becoming more frequent and are already affecting transport routes in different ways. This is also in future, of course, going to have massive effects on transport infrastructure, making it really essential that transport networks adapt and build resilience against the impacts of climate change in a systemic way. And beyond adaptation, we also want to discuss in this round how to ensure that the transport sector really becomes more resilient and sustainable overall, and how these different aspects, the immediate need to react, but also really the long-term planning for sustainability can be combined and how they will be financed. That is the key question we want to be addressing. And I would now like to introduce the distinguished panelists to you. First of all, allow me to introduce Minister Andreas Carlsen. He has served as Minister for Infrastructure and Housing since October 2022. He is leading the government's work in transport, infrastructure, community planning and housing, served previously as a Member of Parliament from 2010 to 2022, and was also a group leader of the Christian Democrats, deputy chair of the Committee of Justice, and started his public service on a municipality level where he represented the party on municipal council and the municipal executive board. It's great to have you with us here. Thank you so much for joining this session. Big round of applause, please, for our panelists. To my other side, I would like to give a warm welcome to Erica Vieira Marcos, who is the Environmental Executive Manager at Brazil's National Transportation Confederation, CNT. She has been there since 2017 and is in charge of the technical content of one of the largest environmental transportation programs in Brazil, She is currently representing the transportation sector at the Brazilian National Fund on Climate Change and the Environmental Council and the Ministry of Environment. And in 2022, she also represented CNT at COP27. And it's wonderful to have you here with us, Erica. Please give her a warm welcome as well. Next, I would like to welcome Nicolas Pelletier-Tilberg. He is the Global Director for the Transport Sector in the Infrastructure Practice Group of the World Bank. He joined the World Bank in 2002 as a young professional and has since led and held various positions in transport global practice, managing the World Bank's financed transport investments in multiple regions, including North Africa, the Middle East, Latin America, Caribbean, and Africa. Other parts of Africa as well. From 2015 to 2022, he's also been the practice manager in charge of the World Bank's transportation business in North Africa and the Middle East, West and Central Africa, and Latin America and the Caribbean. And in May 2022, became global director for the transport sector. It's great to have you with us, Nicolas. And finally, welcoming to this round, Luis Felipe de Oliveira, who has led the Airport Council International, ACI World, as a director since June 2020, applying his vast experience in commercial and technical aviation to this position. Louise believes that aviation has a crucial role to play in fostering social and economic growth worldwide and is committed to helping ACI members and businesses partnering sustainably to recover from the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. He's currently serving as the board of the Hermes Air Transportation Organization and the Air Transportation Action Group, and is particularly dedicated to sustainability in the sector. So a perfect match for this panel. Thank you so much for being here with us. So, as I said, we hope to open up for the last part of the discussion, but we'll begin in the panel now. And I'd like to start with a little bit of mapping, and perhaps also in this mapping prioritizing of the question of what is it that we're funding, and perhaps how we're also prioritizing this, looking at the range of challenges being faced. So I'd like to start with you, Nicolas. Can you start by helping me map a little bit? I brought in all these keywords in the opening statement: adaptation, resilience, transition. What needs funding in the transport sector in order to prepare for climate resilience?
Thank you, Geraldine. I'm really glad that we are having that conversation, because every day at the World Bank we see the impact of climate change in the country we are working with, and we see how they are struggling to respond. I want to give too many examples, but for example, we're working with Sao Tome and Principe, and this is a country where most of the transport infrastructure are on the coast, and this is a country that is struggling with coastal erosion, and so there is this dilemma about how we deal with that. Should we protect? Should we move? We are frequently intervening under emergency procedures, responding to hurricanes, to extreme climate events in countries in Central America, in the Caribbean, where countries have to repair over and over as a result of those disasters. We try to help them to build back better. And then we are working with some poor countries in Africa, landlocked countries, where there is sometimes just one logistic corridor, which is kind of the lifeline linking them to the rest of the world. And so when something happens, when a climate-related disaster intervenes and breaks that lifeline, I mean, these are immediate consequences in terms of food prices and how those countries can cope and respond. So these are just a few examples, and this is why at the World Bank we try every time we are engaging with a particular country on a transport program, we try to bring that conversation about resilience and about adaptation. So what are the things that needs to be done? I mean, first is a bit of a criticality analysis of the logistic network. You know, where are the points, the breaking points in the logistics systems that are the most at threat, and we need to focus our attention. the other thing is to look at technical standards for transport infrastructure. No? What are the standards to build roads, to build bridges? Do they need to be adapted? And a third element that is very, very important and is often undermined is the issue of road asset management, and specifically about maintenance. Because if there is $1 to be spent in adaptation in the road sector, it has first to be put in maintenance. I mean, that's the no-regret investment in the sector. No.
A lot to do. How are you doing it in Sweden is what I would like to ask next. Perhaps zooming in on climate adaptation for transport infrastructure. Can you share how you're approaching this?
Yeah, please. Thank you for the invitation and thank you for this opportunity to share what we do. But let me first start with just see that climate change certainly affects planning of buildings and infrastructure. Authorities and municipalities must consider climate aspects in accordance with laws and regulations in place, and that was what we have been working on from governmental perspective. The Swedish Transport Administration works with climate adaptation for transport infrastructure, and their work is centered around the climate adaptation strategy from 2014. So next year it will be a 10 years jubilee for that important strategy, and that is based on regulations for climate adaptation works for authorities. The regulation stipulates, among other things, that an authority that manages or maintains state property must adapt its operation to a changing climate. Their work must be conducted in a way that prevents negative consequences of the climate's impact. So that's the framework to start with. Climate-related risks are identified, analyzed, and reduced on an ongoing basis as an integral part of maintenance, construction, and reconstruction of roads and railways. The Swedish Transport Administration's climate adaptation strategy consists of 3 parts, and I want to share those. And those 3 parts deals with how the Swedish Transport Administration should, for the first, create the conditions for effective work with climate adaptations, prevent negative consequences of climate change by creating robust facilities, and third, manage the effects of climate change. Climate adaptation consists of several different types of measures. For example, it could be to raise existing infrastructure, to reduce climate-related risks, and to plan for diversification opportunities. Certain parts of the infrastructure can be gradually replaced and rebuilt within the initially planned time frame of construction. Other parts of the infrastructure have a long lifespan and must be adapted right from the start when they are built. Adapting the infrastructure to climate change and extreme weather will require cooperation and communication between authorities, municipalities, and other actors. And the Swedish Transport Administration, together with external actors, needs to investigate which infrastructure is especially important to adapt based on socially important activities, and it's a part of the regular work, and they are working on it every day and has done it for next year 10 years in this strategy.
Thank you. Allow me a follow-up question for each of you before turning to the Brazilian side of this panel. So, of course, these measures are super important. Climate adaptation is important. At the same time, the prevention and adaptation for the future is also important. So perhaps you can also share a little bit what you are doing toward green transition of the climate sector.
Yeah, in prevention, we work a lot with the green transition itself, and of course the main target is to lower emission. That's the best prevention work we can do, and the Swedish government is providing financial support for a large-scale deployment of charging infrastructure, for example, is a part of the government's plan. Electrifying the transport is one of the most important tools for us to succeed in transforming the transport sector, and we see a high-speed development in the sector right now, and Swedish companies paving the way, not only in Sweden but on a EU level, and that's why it was important for us under the Swedish presidency to negotiate the AFIR package, for example, that will create and give a framework for charging infrastructure for electricity, but also for LNG, for example. So that's a very important part of the preventing, to see how we can not just speed up, but to promote the speed up, because the speed is already there. When I hosted the informal minister meeting in Stockholm together with my colleague, the energy minister. We welcomed ministers from all over Europe and the commissioners also to test drive electric heavy-duty vehicles already in the market. One colleague actually asked, this is the prototype? No, it's not a prototype, you can buy it, it's in the market. And to see that the technique and the innovation is already there, it's already in place, is very important for the first, but also to deploy the charging infrastructure so we can manage that transition to speed up is a very important part of the preventing issues in a larger scale. So that I think I can stop there. This is one example of course, they will not help and solve the problem tomorrow, but we have no alternative. We need to lower emissions, and in the transport sector, we see that electrifying the heavy-duty vehicles and light vehicle is the key issue to be successful on, and we have this on the high on the agenda of the Swedish government, and we work together with the Swedish industry that's paving the way for this in a global scale.
Thank you very much. Now, another quick follow-up question for you as well, Nicholas. So, as is outlined, as you already outlined in your first intervention, there is much to do, and more affluent countries like Sweden may afford to do these things at the same time. But how do you see it? Are these adaptation, mitigation, do they stand in competition with each other? As in, is there, how do you prioritize, or how should you at the World Bank, or the countries that you provide support with, or also policymakers in their countries, what do you feel about prioritizing the allocation of resources to the one or other?
So I don't think it should be one or the other. Yeah, we have to do both, and we have to do both at the same time. There is no time, and that reflects in our financing actually at the World Bank. You know, our entire portfolio of transport investment is about $36 billion. About 60% of that is climate finance, and half is on mitigation and half is on adaptation. So on mitigation, you know, we follow the standard avoid, shift, and improve framework. So we work with our urban development colleagues to rethink how cities are organized, to bring people closer to their jobs, to avoid unnecessary trips, to densify cities, which is a very big city problem in Africa. Shift to cleaner mode of transport, whether it's public transportation, active mobility, rail, or river-based transport, and improve. And that's where the improvement of each transport mode, whether it's to electrify or to bring alternative fuels, or to improve the fuel efficiency of vehicles is important. So that's the mitigation side. Now the adaptation, and you know, thinking a bit how we try to work with the countries we work with, and there are two recommendations we give them. No, is one, plan ahead, plan better, and that means do this vulnerability assessment of your logistics systems. Where are the critical points? Where do you need to protect? Where do you need to move? Because sometimes you have no option. It's better to, that's typically the case for those coastal infrastructure that are too much at risk. What's the plan B, you know, when you, and that's, I think over the past few years, we've learned the importance of resilience. And it's a good moment to go back to the way we were thinking about logistics in the past. No? And I'm thinking about some of the logistic corridors program we finance in Africa, you know, with many other donors. I mean, the European Commission has this global gateway program, you know, which is focusing on selected corridors in Africa. It's not enough now to have just one option. If something happens, you have to think about the plan B. You know? So that's why the planning stage, I think, is really important. And the other recommendation, again, I'm coming back to this issue of road maintenance, because that should be the priority. We've done some studies in Africa looking at what's going to happen in the future, and we estimate that the cost of road maintenance in Africa is going almost to triple, 270% between now and 2040. I mean, this is going to have major fiscal implications for countries that are already stretched financially. You know, so we have to think ahead. We have to plan better. We have to look at asset management, and in terms of priorities, to me, these are the top two, no, that I see in the sector. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. I hope we can get back later to how you're doing these assessments, as in what kind of data is needed. Thanks very much. That was very insightful already. Erica, let's look at Brazil now. So CNT represents companies of all modes of transportation in Brazil, including maritime, inland waterways, rail, air, all there. What are the key actions taken by your confederation to lower carbon emissions and become more resilient toward climate changes currently?
So first of all, thank you very much for ITF invitation to give us the opportunity to share what we do. So CNT represents 164,000 companies. We were established in 1954. So next year we're going to be 70 years old. And CNT leads a program. It's an environmental program established in 2007. So it's a teenager. Yeah. And we have so far reached 55,000 companies. It's a program that provides four main fronts. The first one is technical knowledge. So we publish relevant content related to alternative energy sources, waste management, water management, and everything oriented to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and hazard waste. The second front is we provide free of charge, like really free of charge environmental services. So we go to companies and we give them a vehicles evaluation for their emissions. And also we analyze the fuel quality of the companies that hold their own fuel in their patio, and environmental management for them for free. And so far, we have done more than 4 million evaluations in 500,000 vehicles in 55,000 companies. And the third front, I mentioned 4, the third front is education. So for the technicians, fuel managers, fleet managers, we provide technical knowledge for them to continue, working on mitigating emissions. And the fourth front is really defend the reduction of the environmental impact of the private sector within the Ministry of the Environment and the Ministry of Energy and the Ministry of Transportation. So we represent their pleas, their claims, but we also bring the policies that work on climate adaptation and mitigation, and help the policies to be understood by the private companies, and then we support them on implementing them through business. So this program, we invest about 3 million per year in it, and we are going to expand. So we are in a good moment. After COVID, we had 2 difficult years because it was a really hard crisis in Brazil. People simply avoided public transportation, for example, to prevent contracting the disease. So now we are recovering and we are going to expand the program. So this is one example, concrete example that we have done so far. And we look forward about like sharing more about it later on with someone who would like to know.
And can I also ask you to share if the funding for this, is it coming mainly from the companies themselves taking on these services, or how does this work in your case?
Yes, so the scheme is like this. Companies pay taxes. These taxes go to the government, Ministry of Transportation, and a share of it, a part of it, goes back to the Confederation. And then the Confederation provides free of charge services for them. So this is the design model.
Excellent,
Yeah.
thank you for sharing. Now let's zoom in on airports. I want to bring back this little prioritization question on funding crisis mitigation and innovation all at once. Perhaps you can share good practices from your area of work, or how prioritization between these equally important areas is taking place at airports currently.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for ITF and you for having me here. First, I would like to talk a little bit about what ACI is. ACI is the Airport Council International. We represent around 2,000 members around the world. And we represent 96% of the global traffic. That's why we have a very good representation in the organization in terms of the air transport industry that we represent. In addition, 60% of the jobs of the industry are inside of our buildings. That's why it's very interesting to see the dynamics that we have with, in certain cases, hundreds of companies working in the same building, and sometimes mini cities with 50, 60, sometimes 100,000 employees working in the same place as well with the different activities that we have. Talking about two words that I would like to mention that was mentioned for the other panelists, resilience and mitigation. Resilience in the aviation sector is a word that is with us for many, many years. You know, we need to be resilient to work in aviation sector, to be honest, because it's crisis by crisis, and you need to be resilient. And in terms of mitigation, we need to mitigate every kind of aspect of our industry. Every time when an aircraft takes off, we have a risk of an accident. But we need to mitigate that risk that you have a very low accidents in the aviation sector in the world. That's why the mitigation is very important for us. And when we talk about climate change and mitigation of the aspects that affect natural disasters, for example, we have to assess the risk vulnerability of our airports. Because basically the airports are sometimes the first point that the rescue comes, or the efforts to support comes as well. That's why it's very important for us to assess that. And basically what we work in a lot of aspects of exchanging information, exchanging best practice that we have around the world. And we create some manuals that is free of charge for our members and for the industry as well. And we call, in this case, airports resilience and adaptation to a changing climate. That's why basically it's how we, as airports, support the recovery process, how we can airports support the support that will come in certain kinds of climate actions that we have in different parts of the world.
Thank you very much. So next I would like to talk a little bit about like who's funding what and what might be also innovative ways of funding in the transport sector. So can you share a little? Of course, everybody has a stake, the passengers, governments, private sector. Do you know how different stakeholders are perhaps coming together in new ways or other innovative funding mechanisms?
Yes, there are a couple of interesting ideas that I think can be explored now. Coming back a bit to this issue of maintenance, road maintenance. Now, in many countries, the maintenance is financed by road maintenance funds that have been set up and that are financed with earmarked charges, often gasoline taxes. A number of countries have put in place those funds, in particular in Africa. This was a recommendation that many development partners gave to countries several decades ago. If the cost of maintenance is going to triple, as we expect, unfortunately, in the coming in the coming decades, we have to anticipate that, no? And so this is going to be a difficult conversation because the cost of, I mean, the price of gasoline is always a sensitive issue. And so if those gasoline charges have to be tripled, they are difficult political conversation to have. Now, some countries have looked at other financing mechanism, other charges, other fees that can be earmarked, either transport related or like vehicle immatriculation or the fine that are collected on from road users. Other have earmarked passport taxes. So you know, there are different ways that can be anticipated. It's a conversation that we'll need to have. Another element that will affect this is that if we move massively towards electrification, at some point, you know, those gasoline charges are going to be impacted as well. No, and we've done some study at the World Bank about, well, what are the fiscal impact of electrification in the future. It's not something for the near future, but it will come at some point. No, so the fiscal dimension of how we finance road maintenance is something that we'll have to think about. Now, coming back to some of the innovative idea that can be thought of. One, I think, is performance-based maintenance contracts. So this is something that many countries have been using for a long time, and the innovation there is that you let the private sector decide how you manage the investment risk. So you can choose either you invest a lot in a very strong road infrastructure and then you have less to maintain, or you invest less and then you have to maintain more. No? And then you can test different technologies. No? And so by letting the private sector decide on what's the optimal solution based on the risk assessment can be a quite creative way to manage this adaptation risk. And I think it's a good moment to think about a second generation of performance-based contracts that could also extend the duration of those contracts. You know, they tend to be between 3 and 6 years. Maybe we should think about 12, 15 years of those maintenance contracts. So I think that's one example of, and it can be designed as a public-private partnership with annuity payments that could, you know, transfer part of the risk to the private sector, who will find the best solution.
Why do you think the longevity of these contracts would be impactful? Just in terms of being able to plan longer ahead into a more sustainable future, what can you explain the mechanisms a little bit?
Well, the longer the contract, the most effective way you transfer that decision of when you invest and how to private contractors. So, and then you secured the fact that you're going to have an infrastructure in good conditions, no matter what. No, and so. Plus, you reduce the transaction cost of having to issue contracts over and over. So I think it's time. We call these contracts CREMA, no? And in Latin America, there are other names elsewhere. And I think it's time to think about the CREMA 2.0 approach for climate adaptation. I want to mention one additional idea, which is asset recycling. No? And the countries like Uruguay have been using this scheme, and the idea is very simple. When you have a mature road concession that is generating revenues, why don't you use those revenues to as a leveraging instruments? No? And so you could think about asset recycling scheme that are then used to finance climate adaptation.
Can you define the term again for all of us, please, just in case it's not an unfamiliar term for some of us?
So think about a road concession, a toll road that is generating revenues. So then you can use this flow of revenues to go to financial markets and and leverage those revenues to get some more financing for capital markets, and then you can use this financing to invest in climate adaptation. That can be an innovative way to generate revenues.
Right, a circular financing system. Thank you, perfect. Yeah, Erica, I mean, you already explained, it's a little bit also a PPP, a public-private partnership, if you will, your model that you explained in some way. But Meji, you have, other good examples also of innovative financing instruments, can also include other PPP models.
Yeah, sure. Before jumping into this one, just a comment on the previous one. Not necessarily the money needs to come from the Ministry of Transportation. It comes from the union, the federal government, just to clarify. So we have a case in São Paulo. São Paulo has 14,000 buses, and they transport 2.5 million per day of people per day. So the city mayor wanted to electrify 20% of our fleet. So what they did, it was a public-private partnership, a risk-sharing model. The Enel, it's an Italian multinational company, acquired the vehicles, 2,800 vehicles. And for that, it was an investment of 1.5 billion euros, and that needs to be allocated until 2024. The public sector, it came with the project of expanding bus rapid transit lines about 100 kilometers and renewing 30 kilometers of the city. And us, the operators, we are going to work with the operation, train the drivers for electric vehicles, and maintain the vehicles. So it's a leasing contract, and it's under the efforts of C40, climate e-mobility efforts. Similar models happened in Chile, Bogotá, Colombia, Bogotá, and Chile. I don't know the name of the city, but we are working on these models to amplify electricity, electromobility in public transportation, micromobility, and last miles. Yeah, so we look forward to have more of these examples.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing such concrete examples. I think really helpful to understand things better. Louis, so let's also get concrete here. What type of capital investments are really required for airports to transition to net zero?
Well, we expect to double the size of the industry in 40 years, in 30 years, 20 years, sorry. We'll be in 2040, 2042. And to cope with that growth, we need to invest a lot of infrastructure. Different parts of the world have a different needs for investment.
That was going to be my next question. Yeah, are there different needs across the globe?
Yeah, and the number is $2.4 trillion. When you talk about the new infrastructure costs around 8% more to build up an infrastructure that is already cope with the latest developments in terms of sustainability. But if you need to rebuild or refurbish an infrastructure, the cost goes around 19% more than the cost of construct a new building, for example. So this money needs to come from different sectors, different parts of the supply chain of the investors. We have around 70% of the airports in the world, they are public. That's why probably they go to institutions like a World Bank or development banks in the world. But we have a lot of airports that are already work with the private sector. We have a lot of investors, like a pension funds, for example, that helps us to support this development of the future. For us, it's a responsibility to work in sustainability. The sustainability is very important for us, and it's just our license to grow. That's why the idea is to continue to invest in green buildings, continue to invest in the green industry for the future.
So is this kind of like a natural PPP environment, or how would you say the responsibility shared between private investors and governments here?
A lot of countries have a concession mode, and the concessions vary from country to country, different kinds of agreements. But we still, with a lot of airports, especially if you talk about the US, they are from the government sector, from the municipalities. You know, a lot of airports in different parts of the world is owned by the governments, and they need the usual the development banks to use for the investments in the infrastructure.
Yeah. Thank you. So I'm so glad you went back down to 20 years, because of course this is a very urgent matter. And exactly, I was just going to turn to you, because of course Sweden is a leader in this area in terms of operating sustainable airports and developing fossil-free air transport. So I was hoping you want to share something on this topic.
Yeah, I will surely do. But could I just also comment on the panelists here, because I think they have described the different parts of it, and it's very important to see that. Also, when involving the private actors, you always need to, as soon as possible, find a strong business case so it will survive in a long term without state subsidies, so to say. I can give you an example from Sweden, when we were funding market introduction support for the shift when it comes to smaller light vehicles. And now we see, even without this funding and the support, that the majority of the sales of new passenger cars are rechargeable in the Swedish market. But what do we do then? Then we need to focus on the heavy-duty vehicles, where we have market introduction support, but also government funding when it comes to the charging infrastructure. So we need to move step by step. It's also of what it can depend on where we are in the world, for example. But we see now the demand for green solutions is very strong in the market. So our Swedish companies that are paving the way in a global scale, they also see a lot of opportunities. It's not just the challenges when it comes to green transition. It also comes with a lot of opportunities, talking about job creation, wealth, growth, and also first movers and early movers have a competitive advantage, and that's what the private sector in Sweden tells. And that leads me to your question when it comes to aviation sector. We have the state-owned company Swedavia that operates the 10 state airports in Sweden. They are fossil-free in all the work they can be fossil-free on the ground, not in the air yet, but on the ground. And they have been fossil-free since 2020. And it's a strong demand from the customers, but it's also more or less based on a decision. We will be fossil-free, and then they have working very hard to lower the emissions to net zero. And it's not a transportation itself that's the problem, it's the emissions. And then let's focus on the emissions. We need to have a strong transport system. We need to have a holistic approach to the transport sector, as my the Finnish State Secretary mentioned in the panel before in the plenary session. And we need to have a holistic approach where every part of the system is a part to make it as much efficient as possible, to strengthen connectivity, and to reach our targets when it comes to net zero. And what we have seen in the aviation sector in Sweden is that you can plan the airspace design in the most efficient way. We have experts that have been working for that also international to help other countries to benefit from that. I led a high-level delegation to India recently with Swedish companies, and one of the participants in the delegation had helped Qatar to actually redo their airspace design before FIFA, the World Cup. They had demand from FIFA to have 100 turnarounds at the airport, but they just have, I think, 73 or so. So with expertise and knowledge and innovative ways to solve problems, they could reach 115 turnarounds in Qatar. But the side effect, it was a side effect in that case, was that they lower the emission and also lower the cost for fuels in a tremendous way. So that's a good example when the green transition and strengthening wealth and creating job opportunities and making a business case goes hand in hand. And that's why also we prioritize, when we chose our 4 cornerstones for the Swedish presidency of the EU Council, competitiveness and the green transition is 2 of the 4 keystones, cornerstones of our work, and we can combine them when it comes to green transition. We see it from the Swedish industry and the European industry, and I think that's the approach we need to have when it comes also to funding. Maybe we need market introductions to fill the gap in the beginning, but then if we can see that how we can promote a strong business case and the demand from the people and the companies to be a part of it, that will make the work more efficient and speed up the work even more. So government's role, a regulatory framework, not standing in the way for the high-speed transition we already see in the industry, and to put funding where it is most successful for the moment at the specific place you are in the value chain, so to say. So, or in the process, so to say. I will also say that what is successful in the Swedish perspective is that we now have an ecosystem for battery production, for value chains, and also the production of fossil-free steel, for example. When they are going with the plane from, let's say, Stockholm to up north or to Finland, their demand is we need to have net zero footprints, decarbonized tickets. So they push the aviation sector and the transport sector to reduce emissions. And that's what happens when you have the ecosystem in place, that is not just the battery, it's the whole system. It's not just the transport, it's a part of the whole system where everyone is working hard to go to net zero. When you can create that climate, so to say, and the demand is raising for net zero, then that will be a part of the speeding up, because the time is crucial here and we need to speed up.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I want to maybe touch on one more subject before we zoom in a little bit on energy transition topics. So I think it became really apparent that there's this whole landscape of different issues that require funding, and from very large infrastructure investments and maintenance right down to funding innovation, and making sure we have the new ideas, the new technologies that we need to unlock these climate goals. And I think this is a very current topic in many sectors and debates. I was recently part of a large-scale event on renewable energies, and the keynoting person there was making it really clear, especially in Europe, but this may be also true for other areas in the world, we're really great at piloting and putting a lot of money into startups in a very initial stage, but making sure these scale and have solutions that can take effect on a global scale is something we're not so good at yet. This is an open question. I'm just going to see who wants to pick it up. But how can we make sure that we keep our energy and support new ideas, because of course we need this innovation, but at the same time really not keeping it in the piloting corner. Do you have any ideas that you want to share on that? Do you want to go first, Erica?
There is an example in CNT. We are working with a startup company. It's called Celo 4, which means Celo is the last name of the inventor, and 4. It's a calculator of emissions, but it turned out that when we provided the technology for the operators, they noticed that they are not learning about their carbon footprinting, but they are learning strategies to become more efficient and smart in their operations, but as well as in smart logistics, because you can learn about your emissions per routes. So it was an initial target to give awareness about their emissions, because the carbon disclosure project is becoming more reality in Brazil, and the carbon market as well. So we are preparing companies for that. But the companies learned about how to become more intelligent within their operations. So it was a really good turnout. We thought there would be a rejection in the beginning because it's a very, brand new topic for them. And now they want to customize the calculator and really working on reducing their emissions because they know that they are reducing losses too. So, yeah, that's a case with startups that we are working.
I think it's a really great case because it's a good example of a kind of technology where, of course, we want the inventors to make a profit, but should be accessible also for all, and also how to make this accessible perhaps for companies and different stakeholders in countries that are not so financially affluent. Maybe you want to add to this topic, Nicholas.
Yes, I mean, the issue of how you go to scale is always important and at the heart of a global problem like climate adaptation. And the response to that is a bit how you move from pilot to policies. And working from for a multilateral development bank like the World Bank, our focus is often a bit too much driven in project-driven. So countries come to see us, look, I have this road, I want to finance it. So then you focus on fixing it and building it in the best possible way that is climate resilient. But actually, it can have more impact for a particular country to build up its resilience, to work on the normative level, to what are the standards that you use, what's the vulnerability mapping of your transport infrastructure. So it doesn't mean that the pilot phase is not relevant. For example, now in the road sector, there are a lot of contractors that are experimenting new pavement technologies that perhaps will be more climate resilient. So it's very important to leave that space for new technologies to be tested. But then we have to build up that capacity to evaluate and then move to go to scale, and that's where the policy work is very important.
Thank you. Yes, I guess a mix of the right business model and the right policies in order to be able to scale. So I want to zoom in on the topic of energy transition as a part of climate resilience and adaptation. And staying with you, Nicholas, you've already shared really great examples of the kind of large infrastructure investments needed, but maybe focusing on the topic of energy transition in the transportation sector from the perspective of transportation operators, actors in this sector. Where do you see the most pressing infrastructure developments or investment needs?
So there is no silver bullet, and that's why keeping a holistic approach is important, because if we want to resolve the climate crisis and achieve our climate ambitions, we will need all the levers. It's not electrification only. It's not a lot of attention on active mobility. These are all the various tools that we have in the toolbox, but we'll need all the tools together. So that's why I'm really convinced that it's important to be aware of all the tools that we need to use, and the avoid part, the avoid, shift, and improve framework that we often use to frame how we should decarbonize transportation. The avoid piece is sometimes a little bit the forgotten part of the of policies, because it's more complicated. It's densifying cities, reducing the need, unnecessary travel is not always an easy conversation. So I hope we can continue to do this very, very hard push on the improve pillar and with electrification, with alternative fuels, that we continue to push the shift, developing public transportation, rail transport, but we don't forget the avoid as well.
Yeah, thank you. And of course, those voices are growing that we can't put all our emphasis on electrification because those resources have their limits as well, which we already touched on biofuels quickly, but that is a topic I wanted to address you with as well, to see what the CNT opinion is on this, and how are you approaching that topic?
Mm-hmm. Ethanol is doing really well because we already have the second generation So there is no competition with sugar cane and sugar. In terms of biodiesel, then we have some perspective here that we need to take some into consideration. So Brazil is the second largest producer of biofuels, just behind the US. To give you a dimension, last year we produced 6.7 billion of liters of biofuels. In terms of biodiesel, we produce a type called fatty acid ester. Okay, and the transportation sector consumes 84% of that. Okay, and in 2021, the blend was 13% of this fatty acid ester. And we, as companies, we started to have many issues related to mechanical issues, engine performance, clogging parts, oxidation of the engine block, filters, higher consumption of fuel, higher consumption of lubricant oil, all fossil fuel-based elements. We took this complaint to the government and to the regulatory agencies, and they understood that, you know, in Europe, the percentage is 7%, and that we may have to work with new specifications of the quality of the biodiesel. So 2 months ago, the country, they published new specifications, and they will start to be implemented in July of this year. And we as a sector, we really look forward to have some testings in this type of biodiesel to make sure that these new specifications are effectiveness. And yeah, there are some losses related to that, financial losses, like per event that we have to change the components of the vehicle. It's about 25,000 euros per vehicle per event. And there is something important to mention, that it's not only a financial loss, but it's also a social issue, because there are sudden stops of the vehicles in the middle of highways or roads, and not always we have good lighting or, you know, a place to park the heavy-duty vehicles. So it can be dangerous for our drivers. So we look forward for having new specifications. And we know in Finland, for example, there is this new green diesel. It's also made from biomass. There's the Neste company, is the biggest green diesel company in the world. And it's very good for diesel cycles because of chemical compatibility. And it's a diesel that can be made from organic waste. So it's even net negative emissions, because you turn waste into energy. And it can also come from sewage. We see a lot of opportunity there. We still don't have it in Brazil. Petrobras is our oil company. Have the capacity to produce it, but we needed to have probably a mandate to say, okay, the way you guys have 13% for biodiesel, the fatty acid ester, you need also to put in the matrix, the energy grid, X% of green diesel. And the good side of this is because the more energy providers we have, green energy providers we have, they compete with themselves. The quality goes up and the prices go down. So we want to foster the possibility of having this type of green diesel in Brazil.
Okay, thank you. And then just as a follow-up question, also zooming out a little bit and looking at the different kind of possibilities of future energy sources. I mean, in Europe, there's a lot of discussion around preparing for hydrogen. So are you equally looking at those kind of sources and preparing for that as well?
Hydrogen, right? Yeah. we see more as a long-term solution, but there is a lot of added value on hydrogen because by the time we invest in hydrogen, we are also contributing economically and environmentally with the agro sector because of ammonia. Yeah? That can be a good fertilizer, and we also can export. And there is a lot of potential in Brazil for green hydrogen because of our solar and wind power. Last month I was in Pecém port, where the first molecule of hydrogen was produced in Brazil. So there's a huge wind power park there, and they are already working. 30% of the port belongs to Rotterdam, and they are already working on, increasing the production of hydrogen. And for us, as transportation companies, we are positive about hydrogen because the time to charge your vehicle is just 14 minutes. So compared to electric trucks or buses, 1.5 hour. Autonomy, about 1,000 kilometers compared to electric vehicles, 500 kilometers. And you can easily surpass 2,000 kilometers to deliver cargo in Brazil because, we have continental dimensions. So hydrogen, there is a report from International Energy Agency, 84 countries. Brazil is in the 21st position. Europe is in the top 10 because there are 7 countries in the top 10 position. But all of our projects, which is, I think it's 13 or 14, they are green hydrogen. So 100% of our projects are green.
Fantastic. Yeah. Luis, hydrogen, airports.
Well, first of all, I would like to mention we have a program that calls Airport Carbon Accreditation that we are running this program for the last 12 years. That's why sustainability is in our activity for a long time. This program, you have like 6 levels of implementation that goes to the energy transition at the end. So the airports that reach the final level goes to the energy transition, and that's something we need to start to think about as well. Energy transition means we need to be part of the supply chain of the energy at a certain point. That's why in the airports of the future, we need to visit an airport that could be also a supplier of energy because all the stakeholders that use the airport will be part of this ecosystem. Basically, the trucks that use it inside of the airport, the ground handlers and others, needs to have a certain source of energy from electric power or maybe in the future for hydrogen. Seeing today the presentation from Rolls-Royce, hydrogen is quite a game change for the aviation sector, but it's very challenging how you have an aircraft flying hydrogen in the future because of the size of the tanks, because of the infrastructure that we needed. However, the biofuels is the reality because it's a drop-in process. That's why we can have biofuels mixed with the current jet fuel, and that makes an easy process to mix or provide biofuels for the airports that will be provided to the airlines at the end. The problem is the production. That's why we need to find ways that we increase the production. There is a program from ICAO, International Civil Aviation Organization, that is working with the different partners in the sector to invest and support the countries to start to produce sustainable aviation fuels, and that will provide the opportunity for us to go faster in the net zero carbon emissions that we expect by 2050.
Thank you. Nicholas, does the World Bank have any funding activities in this area you'd like to highlight?
So we monitor the discussion very closely. I mean, the 2 hard-to-abate sectors are aviation and maritime transport. There are a lot of conversation about how to decarbonize. SAF in aviation seems to be the low-hanging fruit at the moment. So, and what is interesting is that there are a number of developing countries that are approaching us to say, well, can you help us assess a bit whether it's a good idea to leapfrog and be a first mover in this business? No, so right now, we don't finance specific project, but we are in discussion with a number of developing countries and emerging economies who are looking at that very, very seriously. The same with the maritime sector, which is linked also to the green hydrogen, and then whether it's green ammonia, green methanol. The green hydrogen, we see a lot of momentum, and our energy colleagues who are working already with a number, very actively with a number of countries like Chile, like India, who have already announced that they want to be the first movers in this business. And what you were mentioning also, but I mean, there's an interesting discussion right now about who is going to win between electric mobility and between green hydrogen mobility. I don't think the debate is over. But competition is good, no? So.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not the speakers here, but I think we need all the solutions. I think we cannot place all our bets on one horse here. I want to open it up in a minute for your questions and comments, if you like. So please be aware, prepared for that. Maybe just one or two topics to touch on before. I want to stay with you just for a quick moment, Nicholas, to circle back to what you talked about earlier in terms of assessment. And also perhaps of monitoring of some of the programs that you're financing. What kind of data is needed for that? And how do you ensure that that data perhaps also can be, is there any concept of having that also shared by different stakeholders so that, again, others can be learned and be ready, in particular looking at, the perhaps countries that you're supporting with financing measures? How does that work?
So we are still learning there, no? Because obviously historical data are not valid anymore, no? So we are working on trying to get the best possible models. Many developing countries, the data availability is a problem, no? So that's also why we are supporting statistical system in many countries to help them beef up this ability to generate data. I must say that there are a lot of innovations in the transport industry right now, and this is an exciting moment to be working in transport. In the big data revolution has reached transport already for several years. We understand much better mobility through cell phone data. We are even in and satellite imaging is becoming more and more accurate. There are some discussion right now, and some academic institutions working on whether we can assess the quality of a road through AI and with the satellite imaging. I mean, this is very exciting, and so we are monitoring this, and our goal at the World Bank is when something works, can we move it quickly? Can we replicate it? Can we, if something works in India, how do we bring that innovation to Africa and vice versa?
Great. And I mean, like cost reduction through predictive maintenance and other digital technologies, of course, we could have a whole other conversation on that. And maybe one more question on the topic of reporting, monitoring. Yes, exactly. This is something that's important.
Yeah, that is fascinating because, we believe that the ESG reports will play a key role in the future, especially for the future investments. And what is the beauty of the ESG report is that we go to the social and governance as well, not only the sustainability aspects of any kind of industry. We are talking about the social and governance. That's for us, I think, is very important. Just to mention, 10% of the global economy is linked with aviation in certain ways, because linked with the tourism sector. That's why the number of people that have their own lives linked with this sector is very important. That's why the social and government aspects are very important. We are working now in a big project that is to provide and develop a kind of framework or standard for ESG reports for the airport sector. that you can have the possibility to work close with the development banks, work close with the investors, to have the access to the green finance, to speed up the process of to turn our airports more green, and not only the airports more green, but also the whole industry or the whole ecosystem that is part of our business. As I mentioned before, with 60% of the jobs of the industry are inside of the airports. A lot of companies are linked and linked with what we do in terms of the airports as well. That's why our view is that we can work collectively for the ecosystem using the airports as a goods platform.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I mean, there's so much dynamic in this area. Maybe next year our panel would even be titled Carbon as a Currency. So yeah, I would like to open it up now and see if you have any questions or comments for our panel. So I'll do my best to look around. Okay, there's a first hand already raised there. And I think somebody is coming your way with a microphone. So just 1 second, please.
Yeah, it will pick up. Yeah. Thank you very much, Miguel Caso from PIARC, the World Water Association. So first of all, great discussions. Thank you very much. Congratulations to the panelists and the moderator. So we are an international organization with 125 member countries, and we've been working on resilience for road infrastructure for over a decade now. We have developed what we call the International Framework for Adaptation of Road Infrastructure to Resiliency against climate change and extreme events. And we have developed it with our member countries, so it's directly to apply, it's very applicable. And one of the findings of this international framework is that investment on resilience is precisely the definition of investment. It's an expenditure that can give you a lot of money back, that can make you a lot of savings. So my comment and the reflection for the panelists would be, do you think, are we accurately calculating the cost of climate change impacts in our infrastructure? And more precisely, the investment on resiliences? And are we consequent with those financial results of how investment on resilience can be very beneficial?
Wonderful, thank you. I'm looking around to see if you'd like to pick it up, and if nobody raises their hand, then I'm going to pass it to you, Nicholas.
Yes and no. I think there is one model that we use, for example, at the World Bank in the road sector is this economic evaluation model called HDM4. No, many, it's barbaric term, but many road agencies are using this model and know what I'm talking about. That model has some room for improvement to include what you're talking about now. I mean, one issue obviously is the price of carbon, but then how we capture those resilience effect is something that still needs to be improved. And I can give you one example that comes to mind in terms of what are the indirect costs of when a road is interrupted, where connectivity cannot happen. What we found through firm surveys is that the reaction of firms where they feel that transport becomes unreliable is that they expand their inventories. And this has quite significant cost, actually. So, these are the type of economic costs that result from non-resilient transport, non-reliable logistics. And that, I don't think we capture that always well enough in some of our assessments. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for the panel? Sorry if I'm not seeing everybody immediately. You can also tell me if somebody's raising their hand. All right, please.
Sorry. Kim Yates from Mott MacDonald. I suppose one of the things thank you very much for the very good discussion on effectively decarbonisation and removing carbon. What I'm really interested in is the strategies for investing in that adaptation, resilience. Do private-public partnerships work? What is a good way for financing the resilience and adaptation if it doesn't all work and we haven't removed all the carbon?
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, we touched on this, but can you expand a little bit on that point?
Yeah. For transportation companies, I think policy uncertainty and risk sharing are very two ways to go. And the way we believe on that is, yes, through public-private partnerships, especially in developing markets and emerging countries, which account for 2/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions. So, and as to make it concrete, aside of the risk-sharing investment and public-private partnerships, we think we needed to diverse our portfolio. For example, crude oil has brought us this far. But we don't think the future will be like one single bullet. So we really, as you mentioned earlier, we believe it's going to be a plurality of technology solutions combined with a plurality of energy sources. So the adaptation will require a market adaptation, yeah, that takes a more hybrid model. Things like what he just mentioned to take into the formula and say, okay, if I didn't do this resilient road, how much it would have cost me? And this needs to be put into consideration of the investment as well.
Thank you, Erica.
Thank you. And we touched it a little bit during the discussion, and as I mentioned, was the market introduction and to see which phase is the most efficient to put the governmental funding in the green transition to speed up, and then see which next step will be. And I think what we have already discussed is not to just have one basket, but to have a holistic approach, not change one dependency with another. When we have changing, now we see we have to change from oil and gas for several reasons of the new security situation in this part of the world. We need to have a holistic approach when it comes to other energy sources to have a robust and resilient system. And decarbonization is key for my government, for Sweden in this phase. And then we need a lot of different energy sources that helps to promote decarbonization. It can be wind, it can be water, it can be solar energy or nuclear power. But what we can do to decarbonize and lower emission, and not just have one source to change one dependency with another. And also a holistic approach when it comes to transport, to have a resilient transport system. And also I want to add here, the security situation also can combine the need of investments when it comes to resilience of climate reasons. The new security situation in Europe underlines the need of military mobility, for example, and that could, if we do it in an efficient way, combined with all the resilient and robustness investments we need for other reasons. So you need to both have a holistic and broad approach, but to see what different projects from different angles, so you don't be too narrow-minded in the debate and the discussion, especially when it's concrete and in the field. And that's a part of we discuss with the authorities also in Sweden, and also with other ministries, according to the new situation, so to say.
Thanks. You also wanted to answer?
Yeah, one thing that is important, the decarbonization is not a problem for a government or from an part of the industry sector. Is the problem for all of us to solve. That's why working together is very important in any case. I think the good example of Sweden is a good one to be used. You know, despite of the airport already reached the zero emissions fossil fuel use since 2020, the government is working with the whole aviation ecosystem to try to find a solution to bring in the future years what we need to be done. That's why governments together with the private sector, together with the whole industry, are key to solve the issue and to accelerate this process as well. That's why the public policies are very important. That comes also in certain ways with incentives, I just come back from Japan, for example, and they are supporting Kansai Airport with incentives to produce hydrogen in the airport as well, to be used for the moment for the transport, internal transport of the buses, but could be in the future used in the other parts as well. That's why it's a lot of work that needs to be done, but policy from the government's clear view of the future is important for any sector to reach the decarbonization that you must need it.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, there's so many directions that we could still take the conversation, because how to make sure that these kind of situations where, for instance, public sector is investing a lot of money in the R&D and the development of certain technologies or solutions, and then, of course, we need private companies to come in and work with those and bring them to the market. But again, that question that we kind of touched on earlier, how do we make sure then that those are able to scale, or that perhaps innovation can happen in an open way on top of that? Those are really tricky things that a lot of sectors, I think, are looking at, and can also be part of a key question here. I'm just going to take a final look around to see if there's any other interventions. Okay, we'll take one last question and then we'll round it off, please. Over to you.
Well, I'd be very happy to add an additional question. My name is Gabriele Grimm. I'm senior economist, and what I was missing in the discussion is that we have a huge need to adapt existing constructed infrastructure, the complete networks, all transport modes. We have to look into the materials. We have to look how the materials fit to the upcoming heat waves, the floodings, the jump in temperatures. We have to look into the built infrastructure. We have to look into virtual infrastructure and the climate proof of the infrastructure. And there's a gigantic need for money. So I was wondering whether there are best practice examples or strategies how to cope with this gigantic need and traditional capital to just finance the adaptation of the complete infrastructure network, especially as this is a global task.
Thank you. I think that's another question for you, Nicholas.
So we know that the transition is in the trillions, no? When you combine energy transition, transport decarbonization, and climate adaptation, and yeah, the figures are huge. And so the best response to that is, I think, this cascade narrative. No, public resources are scarce, and so each time we spend $1 of public resources, we need to see how much we can leverage private financing, and there are some ways to do that. I mentioned a couple. There are other risk-sharing instruments, blended finance instruments, guarantee instruments that can be thought of. Right now, this is the best response we can do. Whether this will be enough, that's another conversation, I think, though.
Thank you. Please.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's a very important question, and that's why the problem, I can't answer it on a global scale, but I can give you the example from Sweden, and as I mentioned, it's a part of the Sweden Transport Administration strategy since 9 years to put these questions, the climate-related risks, they are identified and reduced on an ongoing basis and as an integral part of maintenance, construction, and reconstruction of roads and railways. So it's not a separate project, so to say, it's a part of the main work. That's the idea of the strategy, to put it in the forefront and as an integral part of the maintenance and the construction and reconstruction work of the Swedish Transport Administration.
I think the takeaway is just the cost of preventing is less than fixing it.
Just to add, in terms of the airports, as I mentioned before, a greenfield airport costs 8% more to be a green airport in terms of the infrastructure. If you need to refurbish the airport, it's 19% more. If you think of you double the size of the industry, and the industry will be growing not in the developing world, we will grow in the countries that we don't have the infrastructure at the moment. What we need to do, we need to focus is that infrastructure is already built in the high standards of sustainability. Because if you don't build now, it will be an issue in the near future as well. That's why part of our responsibility with the society is that these new investments that will come in the future need to be adapted to the new reality.
Thank you. I feel like that's a good closing statement. I mean, I think it became really clear that there are a multitude of challenges being faced and some conundrums that are not really easy to solve in this discussion. So we'll have to keep talking about it. I would like to ask you all for a big round of applause for the panelists. Thank you. So that brings us to the end of the formal sessions for today. But before you go, just a couple of remarks on what happens next. You can now visit the ITF stand for the ceremony of Young Transport Researchers Award, which is going to happen there just now. So another investment into the future, so to say. And after that, we'd all like to welcome you in the glass hall for the Saxony cocktail reception, followed by tonight's gala dinner. Thank you very much. Enjoy.